You have 5 o'clock. We'll bring this study session to order. We could please start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Flag is at the rear of the room. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, this meeting is open to the public. However, it's being a study session. It is no public comment is accepted. And do want to share our vision and mission statement. Our vision, our community inspires and prepares each student to thrive. Our mission, in connection with our community, the Sequim School District empowers staff to inspire hope and provide flexible, innovative learning opportunities in a safe and respectful environment so each student thrives. And do also want to acknowledge that the Sequim School District administrative and school buildings sit on the ancestral land of the S'Klallam people. While the S'Klallam traditionally come from one nation, history has led to the formation of 3 sovereign S'Klallam tribal governments: the Lower Elwha S'Klallam tribe, Jamestown S'Klallam tribe, and the Port Gamble S'Klallam tribe. District's primary partnership is with the Jamestown S'Klallam tribe, and today the tribe and district share a partnership that includes official consultation on program and funding changes that may directly affect American Indian and Alaskan Native students, as well as holistic service planning for students to remain successful in their educational journeys. And with that, I am going to pass it off to Superintendent Memphis. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, directors, and to all of our guests tonight. Thanks for being here. Tonight, as we move into the board study session topic, I'd like to take a moment to talk about the journey we've been on in Sequim School District. Our district has certainly experienced significant recent change. And in that experience, we've heard from students, staff, parents, community members, that they would really appreciate time and involvement. And so to have us share ideas early, make sure we're discussing them transparently, and seek input are all important aspects here. So I'd just like to bring perspective that tonight's study session is truly dedicated to introduction of a couple of ideas. And the hope is that the board can consider if there is even an interest in exploring these ideas further. And the way that we would do that is hear the introduction, come back to a board meeting in January, have the board further discuss what you've contemplated after this introduction, and then give the superintendent some level of direction, or at least give me an idea of what you would like to further explore and how we would go about doing so, if that's even of interest at all. I also would like to say that the ideas you'll hear tonight are not in and of themselves exclusively linked. There will be ideas that the board may have an interest in pursuing, and other ideas the board might have an interest in leaving behind. So really tonight, what I hope you can do is hear from us and then make some decisions and have questions, and then also think about the ways you would want community input, staff input, student input to carry forth for any of those things. So what are the topics we're going to be discussing tonight, and why are we thinking of them? I would say to you that we recognize that we have some problems of practice that we really do need to have a solutions-based focus for. And we just had a behavior forum on Monday night. We heard a wish list from staff members, and some of those solutions were things like increased help at our schools for health and wellness situations like mental health counselors, having more help on the ground for making sure behaviors are supported well, making sure that we're talking with our students about the things that are concerning to them and that we can actually lead them through tough times. And I'd like to say that we would say that thinking of a systems approach, transportation is a vital component to helping those solutions come true. So we'd like to discuss tonight, introducing to you that we think there are transportation-based solutions to some of these issues, and that wellness really is our ultimate goal. Of course, safety would also be a goal, and we think that it's important that you understand that these ideas have certainly come to me through multiple channels. So we do have bus drivers here tonight, along with Don Hall, Director of Transportation. They certainly have spoken to me about their interest in us considering new ways to organize transportation. We've heard from students. I've directly heard from students about an interest in us thinking about some of the models that other school districts are using. And then we also have heard from parents that have an interest in us considering two-tier busing so that K-5 busing is separate from 612. So we will certainly be introducing aspects of that tonight. But I'd also like to know the history here. Back in May of 2022, this discussion was had, and the district looked into a two-bell system at that time. There was a staff survey that went out. Due to the timing in mid-May and it being so close to the end of the year, the discussion was tabled. What I would say to you, though, is the staff survey data demonstrated a strong interest and significant support for consideration of a two-tier system. So we would still need to explore what our present community has as an interest now. But I think that there is past information that we would do well to circle back around to. And with that, what I'd like to do is introduce our Transportation Director, Don Hall, and have him introduce aspects and some of the logistics that are on our mind right now. And as I said, simply an introduction, and then we will discuss further in January. Thank you.
Good afternoon, directors. My name is Don Hall. I am your Director of Transportation. I am very proud and honored to serve this district in this position, and especially with teammates that I have here. You have a great bunch of folks that drive your buses for us. So to get started, so what transportation looks like now. So this, what you see here is our stadium lot. This is where pickup and drop off takes place now. And this is a picture in the afternoon. You have a mixture of all grades together in one from second grade through high school, getting off and boarding the buses here. There is a lot of pedestrian traffic, and we also, when we pull into that lot and pull out of that lot, you're utilizing crossing guards to help traffic control. Gray Wolf Elementary. This is where you pull into in the mornings and afternoons to drop the kids off. This is what it looks like in the afternoon, and where we're pulling across, and the traffic lane, the looper lane there with folks picking up their kids. So there is some congestion there, and some other things that we need to consider. What could it look like? So this is an aerial picture of Sequim High School. If we were to introduce a two-tiered system, we would not need to use stadium lot any further for pickup and drop off. So we would try to go back to utilizing our existing and designed bus ramps. So this is what it would look like at the high school. And with this, one of the issues we might have to look at is parking as well. So this is what it will look like there at the high school. and so on. So the buses will fit perfectly in there. And that's the route they used to take. Sequim Middle School, there's two possible routes there. One I call the landing strip, which is the one on the left, because it's nice and long and wide. The other one on the right, it actually still has signage for buses there. So it's from a time when we used to use that as a loading and pickup spot. With that, there wouldn't be any impact as far as parking. Helen Haller, again, we'd be able to utilize the existing bus lane. And part of what this is doing too is it's dropping the kids right off at the school. They're getting off right off there and able to go directly into the schools. So it provides a safer avenue for school to get in and out of school from the elementary grades all the way up to the high schools. So that's a look at the bus ramp. Gray Wolf, we have some question marks there. Interesting design. The lot to the north has an existing bus ramp there. It still has existing signs there for buses. And I've been told that buses have used both sides for pickup and drop off. And so one of the things that we've looked at there is where a bus can possibly go. I went out with Mike Santos to look at it as well, and just looking at what possible options we could do out there to make a good, safe bus loading zone and keep parking at the maximum as well as parent drop off. And again, the north lot still has existing signage for buses there, even though we're not utilizing that lot. So for drop off, whoops, go back. There we go. For drop off and pickup areas, the stars there with the question marks. At the stadium lot, I would recommend considering that as your parent pickup and drop off point for Helen Haller. One, it would assist with the traffic congestion that is out on the streets now during pickup time, and give a safe place for folks to get off the road and pick up their kids. It would also allow us the lane or the parking right next to the portables out there for a place for our sped buses to drop kids off at that facility as well. Keep them safe and go directly into their classrooms. At Gray Wolf, parent drop off, pickup, look at three possible options. Either lot that in the front of the bus school that we would not be using as a bus pickup lane, or potentially having the parents go around the back of the school to pick up and drop off there. So some of the advantages that we would have is safer pickup and drop off at all the schools. If we're picking up, or if we're dropping off school side right there immediately on the sidewalk, they're able to get right into the schools. They aren't walking a very long distance to get to school, and possibly have some options of making a hard right turn and not getting into the school. So right there and going right on in, as well as picking up. Kids come right directly out of the schools and right onto their buses. Increased efficiencies. With that, we would be looking at the routing of the buses and things, and hopefully getting our efficiency back into par to where it should be, because we're running some routes now that aren't routed very efficiently. And so we would look at that. Elementary only runs. We would have kids only K5 only on a run. And then the secondary students would be on a second run after that. With that, we would anticipate an increased elementary ridership. We did this in a district that I was at, and the same situation. We had a single tiered system, and we had a lot of parents telling me they didn't put their K5 kids on the buses because they didn't want them riding with the middle school and high schoolers. and we went to the two-tiered system, we saw a significant increase in the elementary school ridership. So that took off a lot of pressure for the pickup and drop off for the parents at the elementary school there. So I would anticipate that would be the same thing here. Reduce tardies by going to a two-tiered system with the potential of scheduling the high school, middle school and high school later than the elementary school. We could potentially reduce the amount of tardies. When we went to the system in Toledo, we saw a significant drop in the tardies there. We also saw a significant drop in vehicle accidents with kids because they're getting better sleep and they're also driving in the daylight rather than in the dark. We'll have fewer buses on the road. Because what we anticipate is that when we do this, we will, with the rerouting and things, we will potentially reduce the number of routes that we're running. So we, with some consolidation and making sure that routes aren't crisscrossing each other, because we have several routes that crisscross and they're dropping kids off one spot, and then another route comes and drops off a student at another spot. Another route comes and drops off a student, another route, one route would be picking up and dropping off those kids. And one of the other things is too, is there are several school districts that have gone to this over the last couple of years. And one of the biggest reasons they've gone to that is because of the bus driver shortage. And so we've been able, so those districts have seen that they've been able to reduce the number of routes that they have to cancel because of sickness and other things with the drivers. So it would help us with our driver shortage. We would see improved student behavior, and we just had the meeting the other day with this. And what we have found is, again, when you separate the grades, the student management, the student behavior really gets better. When we went to this in Toledo, we saw a significant drop in elementary issues. Part of it was too is when you have pickup and drop off at the schools like we're potentially looking at here, there's kind of what we call the rule of five. And that rule of five is you have that last bell, kids exit the school, they get on the bus, 5 minutes later, that bus is pulling out. We know that if the kids are sitting on the bus for a long period of time, they start getting antsy, especially elementary kids. And so this would eliminate a lot of that. So the kids would be getting on the bus and heading for home a lot quicker than they are now. And the same thing with the middle school and high schoolers. They get on and away we go. So, and also with that, we would see better attendance, improved sleep patterns for secondary schools. What we saw and what studies have shown, you see improved grades. You actually see improved athletic performance. And also, kids just, their behavior both on the bus and at school improved significantly. There is a potential for slightly longer routes when we do this, when we start consolidating and things. So it would not, I don't anticipate it being significantly longer than they are now. We may add 15 minutes to potentially at the very longest half an hour to a route. The potential for increased fuel costs. We could possibly see slightly longer routes, more provided hours. So for the longer routes, it would provide more hours for the drivers. And with those longer hours, it would help with our recruitment and retention. You may see the higher fuel costs. I would estimate right now, as I'm looking at a potential of a 20% increase in the fuel costs because of running the route twice. However, I anticipate a reduction in cost of bus maintenance because we would not have as many buses running as we do now. So for instance, we could go from 18 routes to 14 routes. So there'd be only 14 buses that we'd have to make sure that we're maintaining. Potential early dismissal for athletes to get to away games. This is one of the biggest things that the school districts that go to a two-tiered system here is that the athletes, since the high schools are going later, athletes have to be dismissed early to miss the last class of the day to get to an away game. What a lot of schools districts have done is they've mandated that last class not to be a core class. So it would be an elective class, so they're not missing, you know, a very important class. One of the things as well is when you look at studies, especially grades and who has better grades, usually your athletes maintain a good grade average. And that's even with missing some classes. You know, we all like to think about, you know, the good old days and what we did in our school. You know, I went to North Thurston High School and I was very active in sports. And we were always dismissed early and missing the last period of the day. And I maintained a pretty good grade point average and I worked, and I was one of these kids that didn't get enough sleep. But that was one of the things that we did. There will be potential childcare issues for the elementary parents. What a lot of districts have done with this is they've increased what their after school programs are. In Wenatchee, we did an after school program that was funded through the 21st Century Grants. And with those, and just like the tutoring, after school tutoring that we're doing now, if we're running an after school bus and the students that are on there are in an academic program, like the tutoring, we can actually count that ridership. So if they're an extracurricular or a club or something like that for an after school, we can't count that. But it would potentially help with our ridership counts. What needs to be considered are staffing costs. Is looking at the staffing costs going from a single tier to a two-tiered system. And with what we have going right now is I don't believe you'll see a significant cost increase in staffing costs. Fuel costs, yes, we anticipate, you know, higher fuel costs. It would help with us our safe pickup and drop off at our schools. What we'll need to look at is what will ridership look like? You know, will folks actually, you know, decide to start using the buses? One of the things is school bus ridership, or taking a school bus to school, is the safest form of travel for our school students, because there's a lot fewer accidents on school buses than there are in personal vehicles. So it's a safer way to get to and from school. And how will the routes be configured? So those are all things that we will need to look at. So with this slide and the next couple slides are just some examples. So this is from Wenatchee High School. And they start at 8:40 in the morning and they get out at 3:25 in the afternoon. This is where I started driving school bus. And the students there that were in sports in the high schools always were released early to attend away games. Next slide. This is from Vancouver Public Schools. They just went to they went to a three-tiered system this year. It was announced to the public last year in May. And they pushed it forward because they had significant issues with driver shortages, and that was one of the big reasons they were pushing to go to a three-tiered system. As you can see, the elementary school started at 8, they get out at 2:30. The middle school started at 9:20, they get out at 3:50. The high school started at 8:35 and get out at 3:10. So they did the flip-flop and moved their secondary schools to a later start time. Next. Toledo. This is the two-tiered system that we went to there. And so Toledo Elementary starts at 8 o'clock, they get out at 2:30. The middle school starts at 9:10, they get out at 3:40. The high school starts at 9 and they get out at 3:30. And with that, we would stop at the high school first, drop off the kids, then we would go to the middle school and drop off. Here, that would be the same thing. We would drop off whichever one we decided to go first or second. We would stop at either the middle school, drop, and then come to the high school, drop. Same with the pickup. We would start there and then zip over here, pick up, and we'd be on our way. And one of the things I want to say about the Vancouver bell schedule, they actually call this healthy start times because of the studies that they've done with the sleep studies and things for their secondary students. What's next? So these are just some things to consider what we might need to do next, you know, what, and think about. Potentially, form a committee to look at what transportation is, how this would be affected, and make a proposal based on what you guys decide to do, or present something to you to help with your decision. We'd build two-tiered routes with our new routing system that's coming, and we would alpha test those, which means we would just get on those routes and start running them to see how they go, timing, you know, how they flow, and so on. And then testing the bus lanes at each one of the schools. And we know that there's going to be a whole lot of questions and concerns raised. So from you and the community, staff members, so on. And so we just need to make sure, you know, get those and we research them really well and give you good informed answers to that. So in your packet are several different things, and the references I have had the opportunity to have somebody from the Washington Risk Management Pool, who is our risk management company, come out and take a look at these bus routes and stuff for me. The Columbian article about the Vancouver change this year. Studies from the American Physical Therapy Association, the University of Washington News, American Academy of Sleep Medicine, an article, news program that King 5 News did, an article from the Sleep Foundation, an article from Stanford Medicine, as well as CNN. There's also a list of legislation in your packet, what other states are considering. There are a lot of states that are considering mandating that high school starts later than the elementary schools. California is the first state to actually start doing that this year. And Florida, theirs goes into effect in 2026. So there are a lot of the states that are in that study. They have formed groups to study the situation and come back and provide more information. And so it's a growing concern. And people are starting to really realize different sleep patterns for the elementary kids and the secondary kids, and how it benefits them. So, any questions?
Yes, I can start with a question. Do we have an idea of how many high school students, because I know as they get older, they can drive and stuff, are
Mhm.
currently using our busing now? Do we have a ballpark of how many high schoolers?
So I don't have that number with me right now, but I
Right.
can get it for you,
Okay.
because we do keep track of kids that ride that are high school ridership or middle school ridership and our elementary ridership. So I can get that. I can get that for you.
And then the second one, was there a specific reason why we had the buses potentially routed in front of Gray Wolf where the parents currently pick up instead of behind the building?
So there are two designated drop points there now that were for buses. That's actually a safer way to drop the kids off because they get right onto the sidewalks and they go right straight in. I will tell you, we have a similar situation in Shelton where we have just like that back road that goes through the playground. And our risk management company came in and looked at that and we couldn't drop off there anymore. In fact, they actually fenced it so the bus couldn't go into that anymore. So that's a potential risk management situation where we are taking the buses around the back. So,
And we don't anticipate a risk management issue with parents using that?
so
route?
it's just an option to look at.
Okay,
So one of the things that we looked at, Mike and I looked at too, is possible redesign of the entire front parking area where ramps would come straight through, and there would be parking in the back, and that back area is there. And of course, it takes money to do that. But, you know, anything that we can make it safer for the kids on the bus to get on and off the buses at the schools.
yeah, okay. I just worry that the reason for my question is I worry that if it's problematic for risk pool for buses to go behind the school, I would imagine it'd probably be maybe
Yep.
even more so problematic individual cars going behind the school. So anyways, thank you for answering those questions.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I like that point you brought up about the- if we go to a plan, something like this, to alleviate that congestion in the stadium parking lot,
Mhm.
it's a lot safer for kids, especially at Gray Wolf. I mean, at Helen Haller to get on and off the buses right there in front of the building,
Yes,
not have to go in and out of that parking lot.
yes.
And so if there's a way to do that, I think we ought to continue to problem solve that one and see if there's something more we can do. And then, yeah, the congestion out at Gray Wolf, we would just have to, hopefully more kids would ride the bus, and we would have to, get parents to change their habits a little
Mhm.
bit to go, I guess, in and out of the parking lot
Yeah.
instead of on those bus routes.
Right. So keep back to your point, I would prefer not to see any vehicles going behind Gray Wolf whatsoever. But there's 3 options. We looked at them and, we pick one and throw them, pick the high number and the low number, throw them out and come up with the middle, right?
Right.
And so one of the things that just a couple of thoughts that I had is how these would go. We already have the district, as far as routing is concerned, kind of split in half, the east and the west. So 2 options would be, if we decided to go with K5 early, the east buses would come in, stop at Helen Haller, drop off their Haller kids. The west buses would come in, stop at Gray Wolf, drop their kids off there. Then they would just crisscross and drop off each way that way. It's also going to help us with our student counts as well, because right now it's kind of a hit and miss thing on how we're counting. We've got a lot of check marks. Some are using the counters, some are using their fingers. If we're stopping at each one and we're having the kids get off with a counter, we know, okay, we just dropped off 10 students at Helen Haller. We mark that down so we keep track of exactly how many kids we're transporting to each school. So, and the same thing with Gray Wolf. So then from there, 2 options could be, and this is part of the alpha testing. So the east buses that are now at Gray Wolf, the west buses at Haller, reverse and go back to their original routes and pick the secondary students up. Bring them back, all of them then go to the middle school, drop, all of them then go to the high school and drop. Or just depending on how it looks. So the east drops their kids at Haller, go to Gray Wolf. Then they, instead of going back and doing their routes, they just then take on some of the west routes in the afternoon for the high school students and vice versa. So just some things to look at, how that would work.
Any thought given to east-west bus routes? In other words, Gray Wolf buses just pick up Gray Wolf kids, from 7th Street on, whatever the boundary. And east side Helen Haller buses only pick up the Helen Haller kids and bring them, so there's no crisscross. And then they go and do the high school routes.
Well, now it's, because you have Gray Wolf is the entire district.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of those things we talked about. Transportation is going to be the key to
Yes,
that reconfiguration.
Yep.
So,
yeah, that's the big thing with, especially with the elementary kids.
Mhm.
The length of time that they're on the bus, either in the morning or in the afternoon. It gives them time to get amped up and things. And, we did the same thing in Toledo. Kids were on the bus for almost a half an hour. The elementary kids, before we even started headed home with them.
mhm.
And during that half hour, they're in a confined, 40-foot, 35,000-pound tube. And, they can get a little antsy.
Mhm.
Whereas when we left right at 5 minutes after the bell rang, there wasn't a whole lot of that. The kids settled down because the bus is moving. There's less jumping around, and we're able to basically age appropriate student management techniques. What you want, how you want to present it to an elementary student isn't going to go well with a high school student. And so when you're trying to do that with a mixed group now, it's really difficult. And with the middle school, high school kids on the bus with the elementary kids, they tend to emulate some of the stuff that they see. And so some of that stuff. So the same thing, same thing with middle school, high schoolers, they want to get going. They don't want to be just waiting around. So they get on the bus here and then we head out to Gray Wolf. So they're on the bus for 20, 25 minutes before we even start heading out.
Speaking kind of as a, wearing my first grade teacher hat, I find the 5-minute idea and very ambitious. I mean, I'd love to be proven wrong though.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So that's what we did in the districts I'm familiar with. And, teachers get them out, we get them on the bus and we're gone.
7.
Expectations.
Yes.
You were concerned about lateness and so on. I know coming down here, I followed a bus down North Squim Avenue that let a student off at Sunland. And then came down to the roundabout and headed off Old Olympic. I don't know if they had any more students to let off or not, but it was a 4:45.
Mhm. So that would have been our after-school route.
So those would continue even if with a later start.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because if we were to get a 21st century grant or the grant that we're using now for the after-school programs, and as long as they're, as long as they're in an academic program like the tutoring program, we can count those kids. So that means we more than likely would not lose the ridership because some of those students that are in there are riders. So when they're not going home in the afternoon, we're losing that count. So if they're on the bus in the evening time going home, we don't lose that count. Plus, if we have some other students that don't normally ride the bus, but they need the bus to get home with the after-school program, that will potentially increase our, not a whole lot, but could increase our ridership. So there's 3 things that they look at when they're funding us. One, of course, is for our transportation allocation. One is our ridership. 2, what our prior year expenditures were and what our efficiencies are. And the efficiency thing is a big thing because we're looking at how many kids you're transporting on the bus, the distance between stops, and how long the route is. And our district has not received full allocations for a long time. So that's one of my goals, is to increase those allocations so we get the appropriate allocation for our transportation department.
The efficiency of it would be potentially based on, you talk about the stops there being, is that based on how frequently they're having to stop?
It can be, that's one of the things that they do look at. So like any of our in-town routes now, they're gonna be looking, are you stopping at every house or do you have core stops? So they're expecting students to go to a core stop. When you're in rural areas, depending on what kind of road you have and things, you sometimes just can't get away from that curb to curb stop all the way down, where you're going 100 feet down. I'll just give you an example. Toledo, we had one road that basically you had the road, the fog line. It's a fog line was there because more often than not, it was at the bottom of the 6-foot ditch. And so, there's no safe place for the students to walk.
Yeah.
And we'd have to actually pull over into the other lane to drop the kids off. So they had a landing spot. So,
Well, I just, how that, if that's in any way connected to funding, I mean, I think, that's.
yes, so when we do our October reports, we have to send our routes to OSPI. And there's a GIS guy there that looks at everything. So for instance, 3 routes that we have out on Old Olympic that are dropping off, passing one to drop somebody off. They're looking at that and they're saying that's not an efficient way to run the bus. The other thing is they're looking at is how many students we have on the bus. Are we utilizing all of the space on the bus? So one of the things they look at with our buses, if we have a 26 passenger bus, they expect there to be 84 passengers on that. That's 3 to a seat. That's not realistic, especially for high schoolers. So to me, that's a 52 passenger bus. So if we're putting 52 passengers on there, we're utilizing that bus. If we're putting 15 on that bus, where it sits 56, OSPI looks at it that we're not appropriately using our resources.
Yeah, I just, although not directly related to this idea, I do find it a little frustrating that it's like we make decisions based on, we have to think about the student safety when we think about where to do those drop-offs. You have
Yes.
a community where you have sidewalks everywhere, you know, yeah, kids can walk, they could consider that to be more efficient technically, but we're having to make, you know, it's just not. It's not a fair system really, but
Yeah, you know,
add it to
and-
the list of unfair.
And well, you heard me say earlier in the year, talked about the STARS reports, and that's
Yeah.
how, you know, we do all our reporting, that's how they decide how we're allocated. And the STARS system is not fair to smaller districts or rural districts
Right.
at all. So that, you know, the funding process and the way they look at it really truly needs to be changed.
That's two questions. You mentioned that California, does California did it statewide?
Statewide,
Because I know if California does something, Washington is usually not too far behind. Is your, won't quote you on it, but is your opinion that this looks like the way things are trending? And you wouldn't be surprised if we get similar mandates or pressure to do that here in Washington?
I'm not aware of anything that's been proposed in the legislature yet. But you're seeing more and more schools go that way. You know, Lake Washington just did it. Seattle schools did it several years ago. Evergreen School District, and Vancouver School District, both, you know, down there in Vancouver, they're all now in this system where their elementaries are earlier, their high school are later. You know, there are so many studies out there that talk about, you know, sleep and sleep patterns for the kids. You know, we heard a little bit about it at the meeting we had the other night, where our elementary kids, you know, they need longer sleep, and so do our high school kids. You know, it's kind of interesting because one study that I didn't put in there, it did talk about the age difference and things of how your body goes. And that study also said that for teachers, and unfortunately it didn't work very well for the elementary teachers, but teachers that are in that early 20 to 35 age range that are teaching in the middle school, high school, also benefit from that later start time. But they find it about the age of 35, our clocks start turning the other way, where we don't sleep nearly as long. And, you know, at my age, you know, I'm lucky if I get 4 hours of sleep and then I'm awake. And then I'm also thinking about having to do something like this and worrying about it. So, so anyway, you know, that's, you know, sleep is an important thing. You know, when you look at it, when kids are sleeping, they're growing. So if they're getting more sleep, they're getting stronger bones, stronger muscles, and so on. And so,
Well, I mean, putting the two-bell schedule aside for my second question,
Mhm.
and then I think I've answered all of them. I'm sorry to monopolize so much time here. But if we have studies are showing better sleep, is there, other than the bus efficiencies, why not have both elementary and high school start later? What would be is the only reason because of the busing?
no, it's part of it is the sleep, because the younger kids, they, you know, if they should be going to bed, you know, like we heard the other night, much earlier than they are.
Yeah.
They also wake up early.
Okay.
Than middle school. There is a magic thing that happens to kids somewhere between 10 and 13.
Yeah.
That starts changing that process. Our biological systems just change with that.
Thank you.
I'd like to add something to that question. I'd say that we're on a single tier right now, and so I think your question ultimately is, can we just stay on a single tier as an option and bump it to a later time?
Right.
And I think the answer would be yes. And that's one of my points I was making earlier. I really hope that you all consider all the iterations that could come from this and how we think about, there's not an all or nothing here. We can separate issues, but I want to come back to the why we are thinking about this. The why is really around wellness and safety, and we've also heard about behavior. So I think if we were to talk to our bus drivers, they would appeal to us that the two-tier busing system is significantly of interest because the separation of the K-5 allows for a different culture of building bus etiquette, bus safety with that population versus having the secondary population where you just establish a different culture on the bus and a culture of respect, but you don't have to teach as much because they've been through it. Also, I'd really like to talk about attendance. Our district right now is challenged, as is the system across the nation, with attendance statistics. And I do think that the secondary, we are challenged in that way, and I think that a later start time might aid us in that. Do I think it could help in the elementary side too? Maybe, but one thing that I've thought about are parents. Many parents have to get to work at a certain time, and they rely on school to be a place that is able to receive their children earlier. So just as a point of practicality, I'm not sure if a single tier later start is beneficial to all. We do it on Mondays, right? And it certainly is working, but I think I've heard from some parents that say it is a bit of pressure on Mondays. I also would share the sleep aspect. The research that we're reading is really talking about sleep in the adolescence. So that elementary sleep is more affected by bedtime, whereas the later adolescence is more affected by wake up time. So just things to think about.
I've experienced that in my own household.
One question I have, I was looking at some of the schedules as to the latest, and I imagine this could be considered or overcome, but just looking at where the latest dismissal might be, and then when would, I'm thinking of maybe Diamond Point or somewhere wherever our furthest out is, are we then getting close in the, on our shortest days? Getting close to, then are we considering where we're dropping off, and if it's dark out by that point or getting dark? I imagine there would be where we bump into that. I guess it'd be Toledo. Looks like it was 3:40 was the latest dismissal, but would it? I imagine that would be consideration and safety and.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. You also consider, when you're making stops, you consider, who is, what the grade levels are at that
Sure.
stop. So we don't want to have something like that with, their elementary kids especially. But the thought process is for middle school, they're a little bit more responsible and can, hopefully get from a bus stop to their house a little safer than an elementary still kid would.
Right.
It's all stuff that we will look at.
Sure. Okay.
So.
It seems like the other thing that's come up with respect to high school kids going later is after-school activities. Especially if some of the schools, other schools that we usually like compete against in athletic events and that kind of thing, haven't gone to this. So is that something that's, I assume that's something that's part of the discussion as well?
Certainly, if the board decides that you're interested in exploring this further, that absolutely would be part of the discussion. One aspect I would say to your point is that the frequency of leaving for away games per season, we could probably count on definitely two hands, probably one. And so I'd want us to keep in perspective how many times this impact happens compared to how many times we have students who are tardy. Okay.
Right.
So yes, it's real, and we need to be discussing this with places where we're competing. And I think if it's the choice to move forward to explore it, we would literally speak to every system that we do compete with and ask, is there latitude around start times? Do they have later starts themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's starting to be adopted in a lot of different places, so,
There
I'm
are
sure that they've
teachers
already been working around it.
that I'm sure would be concerned about students who are leaving earlier than they already are leaving, and we would need to look at that. But I think it's really important to maintain size of the issue. How many times does this literally happen, and make sure we're charting that? Because I think part of our issue is about wellness, and if additional sleep for students and time to just organize themselves in the morning will help every day, then an impact that is less frequent would be one I'd want to measure.
I wonder, one of the things that I think was mentioned about the last period of the day, and I assume there, that would be something, any, like, a drastic schedule change like that, I'm assuming that all secondary would take a look at that and see how that's structured, but I do worry a little bit about, you had mentioned not having the core classes, but then I think, well, sometimes it's hard to say, I mean, certain classes can be important to different students
Yeah.
too. And
Yeah.
so I would caution, against painting that with too broad of a stroke, because there are different paths with different
Mhm.
students, and so we wouldn't want to unintentionally prevent some students from feeling like they can participate just because they're, they're on different track or whatever that is. So there's something to be mindful of. I imagine that would be looked at very closely in secondary with scheduling and everything. So.
And I think that's something teachers would also be brought in on if there are students who are going to be missing a portion of their class. There's protocols you can follow to get that sort of handled as long as you're aware of it
Yeah.
ahead of the game. So
Yeah.
I was wondering myself just about also the concern, maybe especially with middle school, maybe not so much with high school, but parents who might feel that they have to get to work and they're not really sure about that later start time for their child, to how we would sort of manage that. And that's another question.
We would
You know,
Supervision aspect.
Yeah, supervision in the mornings. I mean, would we have the early drop off
Mhm.
for
I
a
guess.
student?
Those would
Yeah.
all be discussion points that we would be having and receiving input and surveying to see what the degree of interest would be in
Yeah.
something like that. As far as after-school care, I want to remind us all about the Boys and Girls Club. $30 a year, and there is amazing programming going on for students. So that resource is available after school. But the before school question would be one to investigate. I will say there are organizations that do come to schools. Getting them out to the peninsula isn't always an easy journey, but we could investigate if that could happen for before school care too.
I'm assuming there's no current plans, if we do adopt something like this for the district to pick up that early hour of supervision for the, I'm sorry, the hour after, because the high schoolers are getting out later where the elementaries are, we're not looking at us picking that up as a district, staffing that hour. It would be something Boys and Girls Club or some other organization, correct?
Well, I'd say there's absolutely no plan because this is simply introduction, but I think we would entertain considering what interests there are. It would be a budgetary item and we'd have to evaluate anything like that in the budget against all of the other priorities that we have. But I would say there's been no discussion of that at all. I'd like to add a couple of informational points. What Dawn brings up about ridership is really important. Legislative advocacy has been something that you have been striving to be so active about. And I would say transportation needs to be a significant advocacy item for us. And as we move toward Day on the Hill and participation, this is an area, rural communities are disproportionately negatively affected by just the mileage that we have to run. And it is unfair that we would be penalized because we have to run students up to the hills. That's our topography. That's why we live here. So we really do need to work on that advocacy, and we can pull something together regardless of whether we stay single tier or move to a different model. I also would like to remind us that we really do need to think about efficiencies that will be built in. So when Dawn brought up the disadvantage of we might have some longer runs, we also will have better efficiencies in picking up. So we may see mitigation of some of the disadvantages because we get more efficient on a different side of the scale. So we'll have to keep making sure if we discuss this further that we are testing, as you said, with the alpha runs to see what really does happen for effect, because we can imagine all kinds of effects. What's real is what plays out.
Well, as I saw the map of the high school, that's what came to mind when I saw oh, the bus is pulling up right there and kids are just like, boom, they're there, you know, and so, yeah, that's something to consider for sure.
Is there anything else that you would like to ask or wonder?
I guess, I say this partially joking, but then not joking also, cause I think I have a feeling how secondary students might feel about getting extra sleep. My guess is there's a lot of them might sign me up for that, but it would be, you know, I think some student input on this too might be beneficial, just to, my guess is they're gonna be all on board, but maybe there is some other unintended consequences that the student voice could potentially capture for us, so.
If we move forward with this discussion, I think one of the elements of our decision-making needs to be how we plan for input. So making sure we think about each of stakeholder groups and finding ways and maybe multiple pathways for each of the groups to have meaningful input and how that can happen. I have spoken very briefly with members of the advisory group that I meet with, and I will say this absolutely piques their interest. I think there are many students who have two things going on. Sleep certainly is impacted, but they're so busy. You know, our students are so active, their schedules are packed, and I think breathing space is another interest. So just things to think about, but they also recognize many of them are very involved after school. And so depending on what type of models might come from it, we'd want to hear from them about what they feel about evening impacts as well.
One question I have is, whether or not, sort of what we're thinking about in terms of the actual start time. And I'm sure that's going to be part of the whole discussion if we're looking at 8:30, 8:45, 9 o'clock, you know. One thing I did see in some of the research was that a small increment of time really doesn't benefit. You really have to make it enough to make a difference. So I imagine that's still in play in terms of our thoughts. 8:45, 9 o'clock, whatever. But there are probably strengths and weaknesses to each time we look at, so.
I think one thing, just as Dawn brought up a transportation advisory group, we also would want to be thinking about surveying school districts who have come before us. We have plenty of years of experience out of Seattle School District right now. Evergreen, Camas, and Vancouver have all done this right in proximity to each other. What are they seeing? I also think like Washington making this move so recently, they'll have very fresh information about what they're seeing for change. So I think we need to be very thoughtful if we move forward in asking others and hearing from them. Okay,
So the plan from here would be to have further discussion on this at our next regular meeting.
I would recommend that we would consider this as an agenda item for the January board meeting. That would give you time to read resources, contemplate questions that you might have, consider what clarifications you'd like to have, and then we would have a discussion. Just talk about it and see where the interest would be in moving forward or not, and also separate the issues. Because it's one thing to talk about 2 tiers, it's another to talk about secondary starting later. And then what your idea was, single tier and move it forward. I think there are iterations.
So in January, the meeting would be, the discussion would be advisability of moving forward or not moving forward, or would you expect some kind of board action where we would say, give you go ahead and move forward on planning?
I don't think that it would take a board vote around moving forward. I think that from the discussion, I'll be able to distill if there's interest or not in finding out more information or doing something more formalized. And if there isn't the will, then we simply move forward and still remember that we do have safety issues to address, but we would find means to do that. Really consider the wellness of our students, keep monitoring our attendance, keep thinking about how we are addressing things like mental health in our system. And this is just one way in our system to consider addressing some things. There are many other ways too.
So, kind of obviously trying to think about your time and being efficient in your time, because if we come back in January and you get the sense from the entire board that nobody's interested in it, you're not, that would be, you wouldn't want to keep researching that aspect of solving it essentially, right?
And I would say if there's no interest, then we still have some problems to solve. The problems don't go
Yeah,
away.
Exactly.
We
Yeah.
still need to address that. And as the drivers are, they're nodding to me right now, we still have things around our busing that we need to discuss. So I wouldn't say that the topic of transportation would be gone, but going to this degree of exploring these avenues wouldn't necessarily be the vessel.
And it'd be a posted agenda item on the agenda in
Yes.
January, so
Yes.
we could hear public comment on it. Not that public comment would be the only way of getting feedback, because we wouldn't want to be aware of that, but that would be,
Right.
yeah, okay.
I'd be in favor of coming up with some kind of listening session or board community listening sessions to hear what they had to say, and
Public forum.
public forum and or survey. I know we do Survey Monkeys from time to time. I sent the one school district, had another one. I can't think what it is right now, but
Thought exchange.
thought exchange. So there's a way to get that kind of information. And I think the more we get that kind of feedback, the better, because I'm sure there's negative sides of this that we haven't thought about, that there's probably solutions to. But we need to hear, what particular problem this is creating and what can we do to help those students and or parents and or teachers, staff, out. So. But I agree, this bus situation. I don't know that it's something that may need to be solved sooner rather than later. Because of the safety for the kids and, I don't know what we can do in the meantime to alleviate whatever we can alleviate. I know you've been working on it and an ongoing process, and I really
Yes.
appreciate that.
Well, I'd like to compliment our transportation department because we started the school year. We had a lot to sort out. It's much, much more smooth with bus drivers moving behind Gray Wolf. We changed the directionality of that. We have a system now departing out of the gym from that school. And so the efficiencies are growing. And what I would want to say to you is the reason I think we have the ability to take a bit of time to contemplate and think about this is we do have success happening. Could we improve on things? Yes, of course. Do we have behaviors? We have behaviors in every aspect of our system, but our system is still running and we have ways to address those things. So I'd like us to just have the latitude to be thoughtful here, be early in our thoughts, being out loud, and make sure that we're thinking through all of the aspects, pros and cons. Okay, well, thank you very much, Don. I appreciate it. And thank you for hearing us out. And we'll come back in January with a board agenda item.
All right,
Okay, thank you.
we're adjourned. 6:05.
He likes to